Hello, everyone, and welcome to a technologically challenged but happening Facebook Live in support of the Healthy Dog Expo. I'm Dr. Lori Koger, and my guest today is Chelsea Kent, the woman who wears more hats than anyone I have ever met. Chelsea is the founder and owner of Heroes Pets, which is one of the, or it might be the first holistic pet store located in Littleton, Colorado. She's also the founder and owner of Solutions Pet Foods and Parsley Pet Hair Tissue Mineral Analysis Testing. Uh, and she does all sorts of other things in the safe pet food and pet food advocacy world. So, welcome, Chelsea. I'm so glad you could take a few minutes away from that job, all those jobs, to be here.
Yeah, thank you for giving me a break from them.
I don't know how you get done all that you get done, but I swear you know how to create hours in the day.
Yeah.
Um, as people have realized, since we're starting about 10 minutes late, tech has been challenging lately, and we think we are streaming on YouTube and on the Facebook page. We may not be able to see comments. If we do, there will be a 30-second delay. And I'm just going to punch into my Facebook page and see if I can see any comments there. If you could, please, guys, uh, just let us know you're out there. Tell us where you're watching from, and we will try to answer your questions. And so far, you'll be shocked to know nothing's appearing. Um, because, let's see, I can't believe. So what's been happening with you, Chels? What has been new and exciting?
Well, I mean, it's always something having a retail store and a manufacturing company and an HTMA analysis company and being in regulation. Each one regularly has its own things that pop up. I think Parsley Pet is probably the most educational of them for me. I learn a lot
Yeah.
out of that one. The reason that I wanted to get into that company is actually because there's so much information out there about what we believe to be true about pet food and how it affects pet health, but we don't necessarily have the best validation for that. So I wanted to
Mhm.
be able to look at all of the pets that had ever been tested and see if you can establish trends like,
Yeah.
what does a mineral profile or a hormone profile look like for a dog that has only been fed kibble and an allegedly better kibble versus allegedly worse kibble, or a raw food or a DIY diet? And is that something where is there's a really dramatic difference, and what are the differences? And I have very much established that there are dramatic differences, and I have gotten to the point where it kind of makes me sad that everybody doesn't know this information, because I think that it's so important when it comes to formulation and
Yes.
getting diets right. So, having an understanding of how different things will affect other things. Like, for example, if you have really high manganese, then it's going to increase iron absorption. So you don't want to have high manganese in a diet that
Mhm.
has excessively high iron, because you might cause iron overload, or that
Yeah.
sodium deficiency can actually cause muscle wasting. So things like that, and the way that these things tie together is just so valuable. And then in retail, I constantly have people coming to me like, hey, my pet has this issue. I'm like, okay, I know from the Parsley Pet stuff that it's probably
Mhm.
associated with this problem. Like, my pet has allergies. Well, your pet probably has low calcium. There's a handful of reasons that that can happen. Here are some food products that can help to
Yeah.
resolve those, and some tests that you should do. So, yeah, they all tie together. And I'm very glad that I have all of them because they work together so well. It is
Definitely.
also a lot.
Yeah. And we were lagging behind on the Facebook page, but we are actually there now. So 217, we have conquered technology. Um,
Woohoo!
My team is going to be dropping links in the comments. Um, and the first link I want them to drop, of course, is Parsley Pet, where people can find out how simple it is to test their dog.
Mhm.
All it is a hair sample. And
Done from home.
done
So
from
you don't have to go to the vet. You just mail it in and then everything is done digitally.
yeah. And so easy. And what's your turnaround time these days?
It's 3 to 4 weeks,
Oh,
and the
that's not
reason for that is because we can do humans, dogs, and horses, and so
bad.
they can't necessarily actually run the sample on the day that the lab gets it because they
Right,
have to calibrate the machines for that species. So they have to wait until they get enough samples of one species to run the machine for that
right.
day for just the one under that calibration.
Yeah. That makes sense. So they have horse day and dog day,
Yeah.
and hopefully down the road, cat day. Do you
Yeah.
offer any other testing with Parsley Pet?
Yeah, there's also glyphosate testing, and any tissue can be tested. So that can be urine. We've actually had people send in cancerous tumors before, can be
Mhm.
hair. They can test anything.
And for those who don't remember, glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup, one of the most commonly used weed killers,
Hmm.
and one of the ones that's most associated with cancer, both in humans and in dogs. Nasty, nasty stuff.
And also fatty liver disease.
Yes. Yeah. And it's still available as far as I recall, right?
Yep,
You
it
walk
is.
to Home Depot and buy it. Cancer
Yeah.
in a jar.
And
Cancer.
actually, some lab testing that I did with Rodney Habib and Karen Becker, we tested 5 different popular brands of pet food, and one of the 214 things that we tested for was glyphosate.
Yeah.
So, just to give an idea of how prevalent it is for our pets and also for us, the research actually shows that in rats, any amount over 0.01 parts per billion of glyphosate exposure can cause fatty liver. And in the dog foods, we found levels as high as 552.1 parts per billion. So the lowest was 16, which is
Mhm.
way lower than 552, but that's still really high compared to obviously zero point zero
Yeah,
0.01. So it is very prevalent in the environment.
that is true. And, I think of the people who are feeding vegetarian pet foods.
Hmm.
That's gotta be the highest risk category.
That
And I
was
think that's what
actually,
you found
it
in your
was a vegan food that tested highest, and then the next
I
highest was
remember.
a grain-free,
Mhm.
and that was a Taste of the Wild Pacific Stream that was tested, and then the other ones were a combination of grain-free and grain-containing that were all equally high.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not good, and Diane said Roundup is the first thing that they put out at the Walmart garden center.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody get your cancer and fatty liver here.
Exactly, exactly. And, she also said it's been found in Cheerios and Goldfish crackers,
Yeah,
which makes perfect sense.
yeah. One
That's
thing that I found that I think is sad but interesting, a lot of the grains in the pet food industry are sourced from biodiesel waste. So they're legally registered as EPA chemicals because
oh
they're
my gosh.
soaked in anhydrous ammonia, liquid urea, sulfur dioxide, antibiotics, like so many different ingredients. I think there's 16 ingredients on these chemicals, and then it leaves this high protein trash, but
Mhm.
it was originally from a grain. So those kinds of things we know, say, for example, corn is really heavily treated with glyphosate and probably a lot of other chemicals. So that would be a high risk ingredient. But if the company is getting it as a chemical after all of this extraction with all these other chemicals, it
Yeah.
actually rinses the glyphosate off of it. So it's
Oh,
lower in glyphosate. You're just trading it out
you're
for
just
other
trading for
chemicals.
other chemicals.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, boy, yeah.
Mhm.
That's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
But, at least you have you know, you have testing that you can offer so somebody can say, okay, this is here, my minerals are out of balance, or I've got a heavy glyphosate load. What in my environment or feeding program can I change to help decrease that?
Mhm. And a lot of people that do DIY send in samples, so
Mhm.
that's always very interesting. Usually they're just trying to identify whether or not they're doing a good job with the formula that they have.
Right.
I find with DIY, the biggest issue is actually a lot of people don't add enough organ or mineral rich ingredients. And when there's a mineral deficiency, basically the body is designed to be able to chelate out heavy metals. So
Mhm.
the way that it does that is with minerals. So if you don't have
Yeah.
enough minerals, then those can't chelate out. So even with just normal exposure to heavy metals, no increased exposure, you can actually get heavy metal toxicity just because of a mineral deficiency. So
Yeah.
getting the diet right is really important.
Well, and that's important for the DIY. It's also important in commercial products.
Mhm.
And, as we've been exploring in Inside Scoop, some of the stuff with Steve and Susan Recker, the regulations and the recommendations don't necessarily jive with what is actually in the food.
Mhm.
And some of these regulations, well, like I'm the copper person. There's no maximum in
Mhm.
AFCO on copper. So, and there certainly AFCO is currently fighting. People wanted to be able to put a label claim of limited copper or lower copper on the bag, and they're in violent opposition of it. The
Mhm.
powers that be.
What
Um,
I find interesting about that is in the AFCO book, around page 300, depending on which year you're looking at, there's actually a chart that they have that shows the typical contamination of heavy
mhm,
metals on each individual mineral. So, like selenium is pretty much always going to be contaminated with mercury, but not really other things.
mhm,
Copper is contaminated with every single heavy metal. Copper is
yeah,
friends with everybody. So if anything should have a limit, it should be
it
the
should be
one
copper.
mineral that is the most likely to have all the heavy metals attached to it.
Yeah. Janet popped in with a question here. I'm getting those from my phone since we're not seeing them on the main chat. What suggestions do you have to be sure we are getting enough minerals in our DIY plants?
Mhm. There's a couple of different options. I think organ, that's probably the best one. Organ meat in at least 25% of the diet. If you don't have access to that, or you just don't want to do organ for some reason, then whole sardines, like raw
Mm,
sardines, that's a really good option. Raw milk, bone broth, gelatin. There are a couple of like shelf stable options. So with solutions, the heavy metal product is a powder.
mhm,
So again, you use minerals to chelate out heavy metals, right? So this blend is designed to provide minerals to be able to chelate out heavy metals. So you can use that product as a mineral supplement. It's fairly high in iron, but you do always want to have a meat based form of iron because the hemi iron is actually different. The body uses it differently than a plant based iron. So
mhm.
you, at the very least, want to have some variety, and even rotation is a good idea because I think,
Yeah.
Lori, you know better than anybody how crazy the minerals can get in meat products.
Mhm.
Like the copper levels in a,
In certain beef livers.
yeah, like a feedlot liver can be insanely, terrifyingly high versus a grass-fed liver. So if you had
Yeah.
no choice but to do a feedlot liver, then you're probably better off just finding different options altogether.
Yeah, because our feedlot in our preliminary testing, feedlot ranged from like 400 to 1,030 parts per million.
And to
And
compare that to 1.83 is the requirement, right?
that sounds familiar. And our grass-fed, grass-finished cows were in the 60s to 70s.
Yeah.
So 60 to 70 to over 1,000.
Yeah.
And of course, for me, when I'm talking about somebody doing DIY, I'm not an 80-10-10 person anymore. I want, at least
Mhm.
a couple times, go through and do the math or have somebody do the math for you and know what you're feeding.
Mhm.
Know you're hitting close to recommendations, whatever standard you prefer. Um, because just guessing doesn't cut it anymore, especially if you have to use some grocery store ingredients, which may be all you have.
Yep. Definitely.
Um, and I would also add, do an HTMA, do a parsley pet test. Monitor your dog, check vitamin D levels,
Mhm.
because individuals will absorb differently, and you can fine tune your diet, and you can still stay kind of ancestral in your philosophy, but put some science together with it.
Yeah, and I'll add to that that I think one of the biggest, most important factors of understanding the diet from the perspective of testing your own pet is that there are variables about every individual that makes facts not necessarily apply to your pet. So,
Mhm,
for example, you have a requirement for calcium, right? There's a certain amount of calcium you're supposed to be giving your pet every day. However, if your pet has elevated adrenal function, vitamin D deficiency, hypothyroidism, parathyroid issues, if it has mercury toxicity, like there's a handful of reasons why your pet's calcium would go
mhm.
deficient, even if the intake is adequate. And you wouldn't know that unless you're taking a look at your pet and
Yeah,
saying, okay, these are variables that my personal pet has in play, or yourself, if you want to send in your
sure.
own hair sample. So these
Yeah,
are things that I might want to supplement or decrease that don't fall into the range of what would be considered adequate.
mhm. Absolutely. And, I have clients come in to the conventional practice where I do my thing, part-time, and, they'll say, "Well, I'm holistic, I don't come every year." And I'm thinking, "You're holistic, you should be here twice a year,
That's
being
right.
proactive."
Yep.
Doing testing, monitoring, talking about what you're doing, how you're managing. I saw another great question here, um, which was the balance. Can Chelsea discuss? Deborah asks, the protein to fat ratios in DIY. I'm assuming she means percentage of calories from protein compared to percentage of calories from fat.
Sure. Um, that
And I'll add to that, what how it does solutions where does solutions land?
Yeah, I'll start with that actually. So Solutions does a 1-to-1 ketogenic ratio. So it's fairly high fat. What that means is 1 gram of fat to every 1 gram of protein plus carbohydrates. So the amount of protein and fat and carbohydrates that you're doing is really dependent on your goals. So if you have a really active dog, a puppy, in some cases seniors, but it kind of depends on their health state. Like there are scenarios where you might need to do a little bit higher carbohydrate. You can also do carbohydrate loading where you're just giving it immediately before an activity so that they're burning that immediately. Most pets do pretty well with a high fat if it's a raw source of fat. High
Yes.
heat processed fats are oxidized. Those can cause pancreatitis and inflammation, even cancers. So it kind of depends on the health of your pet and like the source of what you're doing as to whether or not that's appropriate for them.
Mhm.
Protein should be an absolute value. So if you don't give enough protein, then you will cause muscle wasting. So you have to meet your protein. I believe the minimum for adults is 45 grams per 1,000 calories, but that is very low. Also, you have to have that with enough sodium. If you don't have enough sodium in the diet, then that itself will actually cause muscle wasting or difficulty with maintenance of weight. So there are a lot of variables there. So again, it's hard to give an exact amount because it kind of depends on your pet. How active are they? How old are they? Are you
Right.
trying to address a metabolic issue? Like you should do higher fat probably if they have cancer, if they
Mhm.
have diabetes, if they are obese. even temporarily, but never drop below the correct amount of protein and add carbs dependent on your pet's activity. If you have a couch potato, you should probably be limiting carbs.
Yeah. And any of you who are in Inside Scoop, you need to watch the replay of this past Sunday's conversation about protein and protein deficiencies, because depending on your dog's activity level, you could be underfeeding protein. You could also be overfeeding it by 2 to 300%. And that's not good either. And as the first thing Steve pointed out, Steve Brown, protein is the most expensive part of our dog's diet. And of course, us, we want the highest quality protein. We don't want those feedlot cows if we can possibly avoid it. We want the grass fed. So to be feeding 2 or 3 times as much protein as you may require just doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
Um, Sarah commented, she just found your tummy butter, and it's the only goat milk her dog has tolerated in years.
Mm.
Nice back. She's so excited to give milk again.
Oh, that's awesome.
That is awesome. And, one of the things I appreciate about solutions, you really are thinking outside the box, even of most commercial raw foods.
Mhm.
You have gelatins, you have tummy butter, you have cheeses. Those aren't commonly found in other raw brands. What
Yeah.
was the inspiration for some of those products?
So a couple of things. One, I've actually been doing herbal blends just for my retail location for a little over 10 years. I'm actually
Mhm.
in my herb room. So I
Yes.
have hundreds of herbs. So I have a big background in using herbs and also getting feedback on what that looks like. So of course that played in really heavily. Also having my own retail pet supply store and interacting with people and understanding the common issues that come up with people that are feeding different types of diets and finding the solutions for those problems. So, for example, I have noticed that a lot of dogs, if you are overfeeding them a raw food, giving them too much protein, they'll actually lose weight. Or some dogs just seem like they need more, but the owner can't necessarily afford to do more raw food. Usually, if you just add some chia seeds, that will be enough to get some weight
Oh,
onto them.
nice.
So I incorporated some fresh sprouted chia seeds into the solutions diets. The other thing was actually when the big changes happened with Answers Pet Food and all of the people that I respected most left the company, I was like, I can't have them leave the industry. I have to do
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
So I decided to start a company, but they had a lot of legal restrictions on what they were allowed to participate in. So I went through the injunction and specifically looking at that was like, okay, if they can't do this, what can they do? So it
Mhm.
very much was an effort of thinking not only outside of the box of what I had thought of before, but even outside of the box of what anybody had thought of before, of like what just doesn't even exist anywhere that would be
Yeah.
really cool, and creating those things. So there were several things that required some extra research, and the butter teas actually being one of them. Finding out that that's an ancient Nepalese recipe and they use it at high altitudes for people that are suffering from altitude sickness
Oh,
because
wow.
you have the neurologic benefit from the fat
Mhm,
in the butter, and
mhm.
then putting in a shot of tea in there for the medicinal benefits of detoxification and digestive support. I don't even think that that's something that I would have considered before, but
Mhm.
just doing research on like what's the weirdest really cool super helpful thing I can find in the human world and being like, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
That is, yeah, and, it just shows, even out of stuff that's really not good, like the
Yeah.
whole Answers thing, some good stuff did come of it.
Yeah.
And of
Very much.
course, you have Roxanne working with you
Yeah.
in a capacity that she's allowed to work with you. So
Yep.
you have that genius to tap. Um, Joanne says, "Love the chia seed idea. I've been suggesting it to those that have big dogs, that they're trying to make feed feel full."
Mhm. It's
Interesting.
also fun because, like, we sell the chia seed alone,
Hmm.
and ours is not irradiated, it's not ground, it's not cooked, so you can
Right.
sprout them if you want to.
Oh,
But
sweet.
if you add any liquid to that, so any of our liquids or even just water, you can make a pudding and you can put them into enrichment mats. So you can make a
Oh,
really fun option as well as a
as well
nutritious
as
option.
nutritious. That's excellent. Lori asks, we're battling persistent lip fold dermatitis. We feed her high quality raw, including solutions products. An integrative vet just told us to avoid all milk, including fermented goat's milk. Do you have any thoughts?
I
So,
disagree because in my experience with Parsley Pet, pretty much 100% of the pets that have allergy symptoms have calcium deficiency, as
mhm,
well as usually magnesium deficiency, and milk is one of the best resources for that. So if
yeah,
you have a pasteurized milk and you're oxidating the fats and you're eliminating a bunch of the natural enzymes that digest the things that are in the milk, like lactose, for example, then there's not going to be a really good tolerance and you can have some bad side effects. But it's important to remember that, like, nature's smarter than man, right? And
pretty
nature made
much.
it so that all mammals can survive on absolutely nothing but milk or eggs. So while there are rare instances where there's a legitimate allergy, I think I've seen that literally once ever in
Yeah.
24 years in this industry. So I would probably check the pet for calcium and possibly magnesium deficiencies. And I will add, the reason that calcium deficiency causes allergies is because the body really requires calcium to produce histamine metabolizing enzymes. So those are diamine oxidase and histamine N methyltransferase. So if you don't have enough calcium, you don't make those. So you're overly reactive to anything with histamine, and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter what that level is.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not going, you can't break it down. You can't stop it.
Mhm.
That's really interesting. And, lip fold dermatitis, while it sounds like, oh, big deal, it can be a big deal.
Yeah.
So I would be with you. I'd be like, let's try something.
Yeah.
And
Anything for the skin, in my experience, calcium is usually beneficial. And normally there's a hormone imbalance that's associated with the cause of that imbalance
well, and thinking of hormones, most dogs walk around either lacking testosterone or estrogen.
or
And
progesterone or pregnenolone.
right,
we
right. Any of
we
the sex
like
hormones.
8 weeks old, we're like, get rid of hormones. Let's make sure their joints never close up and
Oh,
they have every health
it
problem.
it makes my head spin
Hmm.
how and it's getting to the point where it's like I don't want to work with rescue groups because
Hmm.
they are so focused on spay and neuter. And it's like, okay, maybe this person is going to allow their pet to breed if it weren't spayed or neutered, but after they put them through the FBI level of interrogation to see if they will adopt a dog to them,
Hmm.
and they've been to their house and they've met their family and they've talked to their vet and they've probably talked to their insurance company and their mortgage or holder or landlord, and now you don't trust them? It's
Yeah.
insane. And
Yeah.
it's to the direct detriment of the individual dog or cat.
And we could be doing ovary sparing spays and vasectomies and still leave them with the hormones that they
Yes.
require for health
Yes.
without making it, like,
Yeah.
so that they just can't even function in life.
Well, yeah. I mean, I saw a cruciate today, spayed female. Uh, and the number of cancers that I see, and
Mhm.
cancers coming on at a much younger age.
Mhm.
And people are so afraid that they'll either be thought irresponsible, that they feel they must spay or neuter by 6 months.
Mhm.
And my standard recommendation is, depending on the breed, typically 15 to 18 months
Yeah.
minimum. I want all those pelvic bones, the big bones, done growing before I dive in there and take your hormones.
Yeah. But
And
that still doesn't necessarily address the cancer part of it. In humans, when women start to go into menopause, their estrogen levels drop, but it's actually primarily because the estrogen stops circulating in the blood and gets deposited into the tissues.
Mhm.
So tissue estrogen levels can be like 100 times higher than they're supposed to be. And if you don't displace that back into the blood using other hormones like thyroid hormone,
Mhm.
then you end up with cancer as a side
Yeah.
effect. So just the lack of ability to have a circulation of the hormones
Of
that
all
are
the
keeping them
hormones.
balanced,
Yeah.
cancer.
Yeah, high risk. And other, I mean, I think of the number of hypothyroid dogs I see, the repercussions with other, uh, non-sex hormones.
Mhm.
You know, the cats are hyperthyroid, the dogs are hypo.
Yep.
Um, the number of diabetic cats, well, that's largely food related, but the endocrine system of the average pet is a train wreck some days.
Yeah. And I think it definitely does start with excessively early spay or neuter.
I think so. And
Mm.
then, add other inflammatory things that get put in the body, whether they're flea and tick or Roundup or what have you. You know,
Mhm.
it's all hormone disruption.
Or even processing steps. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're looking at pasteurization or high heat cooking,
Mhm.
I mean, the majority of kibble products are sourcing their meat from condemned rendered sources. So that meat is cooked for as much as hours at really high
Yeah.
temperatures. And most kibble
Multiple times.
products are using used restaurant grease as a source of fat. So
Mhm.
that is cooked at 6 to 800 degrees for as much as days and then left outside in a bin in a back alley for as much as weeks before it gets picked up.
Oh, it's
Like,
crazy.
of course, that's going to negatively impact the hormones along with everything else.
Yeah. Oh god, I was talking with, someone who actually works in a pet food plant,
Mm,
and this was mind-boggling. And I've talked to this person a few times, and they shared that one of their jobs, or one of the least favorite jobs of the employees there, was to shovel the maggots out. And it's like, okay, you shoveled maggots? And it turns out the maggots were knee deep. But when you
oh my
think
gosh.
about exactly. When you think about stuff laying around for that long, yeah, and it's
And why do you think that that's the first insect ingredient to be approved in pet food?
I went right there. I did when he said that.
That's what
But
black
wait,
soldier
excuse
fly
me,
larva is.
black soldier fly larva, or there's another new term that was published in pet food industry. I forget what it was, but yeah, they're maggots.
Yeah.
That's Just put it what it is,
Yeah, just shovel them into the grinder instead of somewhere else now
instead of
to
somewhere
make
else.
life
Yeah.
easy for all these big kibble companies.
Heck, just grow them right next to the mixer,
Yeah,
you
that's
know?
probably healthier than a lot of the other things that are getting thrown in there. I
That
mean,
is
it's
certainly possible.
the freshest meat they have in the space.
Yeah. Oh, Deborah wants to know if you have a favorite hormone replacement, once dogs are spayed or neutered, or let's say someone acquires a puppy that was done as a pediatric spay or neuter. You got any favorites?
Well, for modulators, I think one, making sure the vitamin D levels are always sufficient.
Mhm.
Um, all of the fatty vitamins, so vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, all of those are really important. Ashwagandha and Vitex or chasteberry, those are really good modulators. Pomegranate juice extract can also be a good modulator. But again, you don't necessarily know what your pet is doing. So I wouldn't use anything that's really forceful unless you know what's going on. So, for example, licorice root is incredible at elevating adrenal function. So, if you have a pet that has low adrenal function, licorice
Mhm.
root is absolutely the best thing that you could do for them. But if you gave licorice root to a pet that doesn't have an adrenal issue or has high adrenal output, you could actually cause seizures.
Yeah,
So, you want to know what you're doing before you
yeah.
mess with any of them that are really strong.
So definitely testing wherever possible
Yeah.
is the way, and regular testing to monitor,
Hmm.
because nothing stays the same. It's
Mhm.
always it's either getting better or it's getting worse. Um, and you need to make adjustments and fine tune.
And it's better to catch it sooner than later. And with tissue, I mean, a lot of the research that I've read says that tissue is better than blood with certain things
Mhm.
because blood is a late indicator of issues. So the body does everything that it can to maintain homeostasis in the blood. So it will sequester minerals from the tissues, it'll deposit toxins into the tissues as a way to keep the blood healthy. So you run a blood test, a lot of times you're just not going to see the issue because the body is compensating for the issue
Exactly.
versus with the tissues you're seeing a trend over the course of 1 to 6 months depending on the length of the hair sample, which even for hormones is really valuable because you're getting a trend rather than just that 1 second
That
that the
one
blood
data
was
point.
drawn.
Yeah. Janet asked if the local pet store cannot get solutions. Do you ship directly or have people who will ship directly?
We have people that ship directly. So if you go onto the where to buy page on the solutions website, there are 3 companies that we mention will do direct to consumer shipping around the country.
That's great. Oh, my comments just disappeared here. Sorry.
It's okay.
Um, there we go. Just so I make sure we get to your questions. And Janet is asking where we can get tissues tested. So for glyphosate, you can do them through Parsley.
Mhm.
Um, any other labs come to mind?
Yeah, Parsley Pet for glyphosate as well as the hormone and mineral test. So
Oh,
that's
perfect.
just a hair test.
That's hair.
And with the glyphosate testing, you would want to contact us first and tell us what it is that you want to test. Like, are you trying to test urine or are you trying to send something else in?
Send
We'll
a
work
tumor
you
in
through
or
it.
something like that.
Hmm.
Um, oh, and I see Raw Pets is on here and they're saying hi. We are one of the companies that will ship.
Yep. Hi,
And
Sonia.
hi, Sonia. Feel free to pop your website in the comments, please, so that people can find you. Um, that might make it easy. So, what other, let's see, we've talked about solutions, we've talked about Parsley, foodfacts.com.
Yeah,
What
foodregulationfacts.com.
regulation facts? What are people going to find there in terms of learning about what can they?
Yeah. So I started that as a regulatory advocacy educational site. Um, because I post so many places, I haven't posted a ton in there lately. I have a bunch of things that I'll get posted here pretty soon. But it's information about regulation and just behind the scenes stuff in the industry. So I always joke that if it were up to me, nobody would ever read anything that I write. They would just go past what I wrote and just go straight to the references and just
Mhm.
read all of those. But nobody does it. So
No,
what I try to do is I take all of the nerdy references that I enjoy reading because I'm nerdy and I consolidate them into something that's a little bit more digestible.
yeah.
So that's really what you're going to find on there is just information about, um, you know, corn gluten meal, for example. Like, where does that come from? Distillers grains.
Oh, wait, you
Um,
mean isn't it corn protein powder now or something?
yeah, corn protein meal actually is a more accurate term because, like I said,
Mhm,
if it's run through biodiesel, they've extracted the majority of the basically what would break down to be sugars for
mhm,
ethanol production. So it
mhm.
leaves this high protein trash that they're
Yeah,
selling to pet food. But the reason that they did that specifically was to try to de-villainize the name so that
mhm,
consumers would think that it's better than it is. So that's
yeah, just
actually on there about AFCO changing the
mhm.
name of what they basically titled to be villain ingredients just to make consumers more amicable to them without actually
Lala,
changing the
black
ingredients.
soldier fly larva.
Yeah.
I've never
um,
seen eggs. Well, or chicken feather meal is now poultry aggregate meal, I believe.
Yeah, aggregates can be scary too. That's the one ingredient that I have heard people have found euthanized dogs and cats in.
Hmm. Well, and
Also, one other note on having bugs in food. This one kills me. So it is actually mandatory if somebody is using bugs in any kind of pet food product, they have to give them feed, which means it has
oh,
to
that's
be
right.
the equivalent of like kibble or like a chemical sludge. It has to be heavily sterilized.
So you can't, throw some raw hamburger out for the flies to lay their eggs on. No.
No, you couldn't even do like an organic compost and produce bugs for
Wow.
pet food.
That's incredible.
Mhm.
Talk about keeping the garbage with the garbage.
Yeah. It's so sad because bugs can have such good nutritious value,
Mhm.
but, like, if you are what you eat, you're just making really unhealthy bugs and then using that as a protein source.
Isn't that
Ah,
cruelty to
kills me.
bugs? Yeah, I mean, it's essentially feedlot bugs.
Yeah.
That is wild. That is wild. Oh, Lisa has an interesting question. Um, what is the safest form of synthetic vitamins? We're all anti vitamin mineral premix, I think, and certainly we prefer not to have synthetics. But do you have any that you would consider better than others?
Um No, what I can say though is there are a couple of brands out there that do a better job than others. So, what you can look for is a limited profile of them. So,
Mhm,
for example, you can turn over the average kibble, and like 75% of the ingredient panel is synthetics,
mhm,
where they don't even have to know what the nutrient value of the original ingredients were. They just throw in that pack, which is sold with the skull and crossbones on it,
mhm.
and they're good to go. It's complete and
Yep.
balanced. Nobody cares. Or you can have ones like one that comes to mind is Canine Natural. They have synthetics, but you can tell by the profile that they were really meticulous in the way that they selected them,
Mhm,
where there's like, I don't know, five maybe. So they did a profile. They looked at what the nutrients were that were in the food, and then they selected only the synthetics that they were low on in
right.
the base diet and only added those. So that is a safer option because it's still limiting the risk. It's limiting heavy
Yeah.
metals.
Well, and it's specifically tailored to
Yeah.
the formulation, which, I like compared to, the one size fits all approach.
hmm I did a little analysis the other day of parsley pet data. It's not everything that I have, so it's an
Mhm,
analysis on just a maybe about a half of all of the analyses that we've done, but still several hundred.
mhm,
So I actually was trying to identify like how common are toxicities and deficiencies in pets that are eating different types of diets. And the categories were a formulated commercial raw food that has no synthetics, so any brand,
mhm.
and then DIY, where it's completely unknown what synthetics they might be adding, in large part because people don't always list everything that they
Yeah.
should. So they should list if they're adding in a supplement, but sometimes they don't. So just DIY in general, probably not formulated. And then any kind of food, whether it's raw, kibble, doesn't matter, that has synthetics in it, and I looked at toxicities and deficiencies of those.
Mhm.
So toxicities, not unexpectedly, kibble had the highest, but it was
Sure.
1.3% of pets have toxicities with synthetics, and then it was 0.86% in formulated, with 1.1 being DIY. And then deficiencies is actually what really surprised me. So
Mhm.
you would think if you're adding synthetics, you're probably not going to have as many deficiencies, right?
Yeah.
But the formulated foods that had no synthetics had 12% deficiencies, and every product combined that had synthetics was
Really?
18.6%. So that's actually 34% higher.
Mhm.
deficiencies when they're eating synthetics.
Wow.
So I believe that that's because nature doesn't provide things in isolation. Like
Right.
everything works in tandem with everything else. So if you don't have a symbiosis, then the body's not necessarily going to utilize or absorb something that you give it.
Yeah, and I would also question the level of absorption of synthetics
Mhm.
compared to more naturally derived.
Yep.
And the third thing I would say is, what about the people, and this is certainly happens with kibble, they're feeding less than the label recommends.
Mhm.
So, if you're feeding 2/3 of what the label recommends because your dog's chubby, you're also feeding only 2/3 of the minerals and vitamins that are in that premix that the manufacturer says your dog should have. So that makes sense to me, and I don't know what of my conventional owners, I would wager 80% of them do not follow the bag.
Yeah. And I would say that it goes the other way too. So if you're overfeeding
Mhm.
and your pet's system is really taxed by trying to eliminate the excess, then I actually find diarrhea is a really common
Oh,
result of
yeah.
overfeeding. So your pet's system, their kidneys, their liver, they're dumping an excessive amount of nutrients as a result of overfeeding.
Mhm.
So they're just not using the things correctly.
Yeah.
You can still end up with deficiencies that way too, but you're also more likely to have toxicities.
Well, and you've also in creating that diarrhea, changed the normal rate of passage. So
Mhm.
you affected absorption, and presumably created a irritated gut where
Mhm.
toxins can pass through more easily,
Yep.
whether it's a true leaky gut or just an inflamed one that's, going to either increase or decrease absorption.
Yeah. And also if you get a biofilm in there, so like the intestines have the villi and
Right.
they're supposed to be like this with all of this space for nutrient absorption.
Sure.
And if you have inflammation, it's the equivalent of doing this. And if you have a biofilm, it's the equivalent of doing this. There's just
Just
nowhere
not gonna
for
happen.
anything to absorb.
Yeah, yeah. So I hope you guys are getting how interrelated everything is, because it is just it's awesome that it works,
Mhm.
because it is very complex. Um, let's
Yeah,
see.
in some ways it's like rocket science, but then in some ways it's so simple. Like,
It's
I
so
can't
really
keep
simple.
weight on my pet. Oh, well, they're sodium deficient. Add a tiny pinch of salt at every meal. Problem
Mhm.
solved.
Yeah, and it's amazing it's something as simple as that. Now,
Mhm.
I bet you get this all the time. I'll say to someone, "You can feed sardines or, um, mussels or something like that," and they panic immediately about the salt.
Yeah.
It comes from the ocean. Yes, salt will be involved. It's okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but I don't understand where that comes from. Do you think it's extrapolation from human fear of salt or
Yeah, very much. I think that salt is really villainized because in this country,
Mhm.
people eat a lot of processed foods.
Yeah.
So processed foods have so much sodium added, and if you have more than one processed food in a day, then you're getting a massive amount of sodium. So as a general rule for most Americans, we should try to avoid salt so that it accommodates our other eating habits that are not
Mhm.
ideal. But salt is actually not very prevalent in the environment. Like if you ever watch nature shows, like get anything with David Attenborough, and you're going to run
Mhm.
across an episode where it shows the lengths that animals will go to risk their lives to access sodium. It is
Yeah.
so imperative, and it's not easy to get because it's just not in high levels in most natural things. So you
Yeah,
do
unless you
actually
have
have to add it in
dehydration.
intentionally.
And, horses, cattle, we use what we call mineral blocks or salt blocks, and those animals will just go over and lick the salt.
Mhm.
And having tasted a mineral block, it's awful, awful, and it's very salty, but that is their craving, and that's what they're
Mhm.
gonna do.
Yep. And
Uh,
then for pets that have kidney issues or adrenal issues, not not low grade adrenal issues, but higher
Mhm.
grade adrenal issues, they'll usually end up with sodium deficiencies. Or if sodium is out of balance with potassium, that can also cause some significant deficiency.
Oh gosh, Diane says squirrels will lick and eat high tension wires because the electric current attracts sodium from the air.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great fact.
That is amazing, Diane. You're such a nerd. We love you for it. Um, but yeah, and you always see squirrels and birds on the high tension wires. I never
Hmm.
knew that they were doing that.
Yeah, that's really
Uh,
cool.
yeah. And Janet brings up the fact that the need for mineral blocks, especially with horses and cattle, points out how deficient our soil has become
Yeah.
because, what's growing on it just isn't cutting it.
Hmm. Yeah, when we do monoculture, it really manages to deplete and destroy it.
It does. And then if we're using that soil for gardening or whatever, forget it.
Hmm.
And then we calculate based on what we thought was there and not reality.
Hmm. Yeah, and there's really not a ton of information available for really identifying like overall trends on different
Mhm.
ingredients. Like we might be able to find, if we're lucky, 3, 4 sources where
Yeah,
somebody's done an entire profile on a specific food. But nature just doesn't really work the way that people would kind of like that it would. So
yeah.
when it comes to looking at a nutrient profile, I think the cannabis industry is actually probably the most telling place to look. If you look at cannabis, they'll tell you that the cannabinoid content of the same plant will change depending on the timing that you cut it, depending on the lighting, depending on the temperature. Was it indoor or outdoor? Like there's so many things that
Yeah,
create variables just within an hour. So
yeah,
nature is really good at making adjustments, but we don't have to worry too much about feeding those things because nature got it covered. Like you
yeah.
don't necessarily have to be concerned about the deficiencies the way that you would with a synthetically supplemented food, where again, you don't have that symbiosis. There are probably 1,000 things on any one topic that we don't know about that
Mhm.
man might not know in our lifetimes.
Right, right.
So,
I
gotta
would think
trust
the
nature
wine
more.
industry would be on top of it too,
Yep.
because how these different, uh, minerals, plant nutrients contribute to the taste and the fermentation process and everything has got to
Hmm.
be vital to good wine.
Hmm.
Um, Deb asked, "What can you do if your pet has high sodium? How can you assist it to leave the body?"
Dandelion root is one of my favorites. So, like the Better Butter tea from Solutions is a good option. If you have dandelion root in any other form, can be beneficial. Also, identify the cause. Why is
Right,
it that they have high sodium? Is that just an intake issue or is it a health problem? And then also, if it's really high sodium and you're going to have to work at getting it down for a little while, one of the best things that you can do is elevate potassium. So, when it comes to minerals, the ratios are actually more important than nutritional
right.
deficiencies and toxicities. So, you can resolve a symptom of a problem by closing the gap in the ratio. So if it's like this, even if both were in range, the body will respond as if they're out of range because it's the ratio is too
Different.
far off. So if you can bring them together, you even if both were high, you'll actually have fewer
Yeah,
symptoms associated with it. So potassium, like the water from boiled bananas, or just bananas, or sweet potatoes, things like that.
oh boy, bananas. Karen and Rodney took a major hit with the banana treats. It's like, it's just a banana, guys. It's not
Yeah.
gonna hurt anybody. Well, Chelsea, this has been awesome, absolutely awesome. Um, I'm just checking. Uh, oh, someone asked, "What are you guys bringing to the expo? Are you're gonna bring some parsley pet tests, obviously, that people
Yeah.
can order there?"
Yeah, we'll have some herb samples.
Great.
We might be able to do some raw samples. I think mostly we will be directing people to order those things either at their local retailer for
Right.
from one of the distributors that will ship direct to consumer.
Yeah, the handling the raw and not having enough freezer space
Yeah,
is not ideal. But yeah, any of the shelf stable things should be great.
yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
and even the samples are better frozen just for you to get them home even. So
sure, sure.
unless we can figure that out, then we'll probably mostly just be showing what we have and directing people to where to
Excellent.
get it.
Excellent. And you will also be on the panel discussion on
Hmm.
Saturday afternoon. So you guys, we will be talking with Chelsea and two other surprise guests who I will reveal in upcoming lives. And Dr. Royal will again be moderating that panel discussion. And perhaps she'll sing again.
She's one of my favorite people.
She is one of my favorite people. And when she sang last year, she just blew everyone out of the water.
Hmm.
It was completely awesome. Um, so yes, I think we're caught up on questions. Good. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Hmm.
I will be back tomorrow with Melissa Boland of Four Legger, and Friday in this time slot with Caroline from Bold Raw. She recently changed the name. I think it was Bold by Nature, but a new raw feeding company from Canada that's moving into the US. And she's awesome. So, guys, come back tomorrow, come back the next day if you can, and you'll hear from some more great people. So, thanks a lot. And go to healthydogexpo.com to grab your tickets this week. They are discounted for President's Week. And if you input the code George, you will get 25 free gift basket raffle tickets. So, thank you and see you tomorrow.